The UFC's first pay-per-view event of 2025 kicked things off with a bang in Los Angeles with a great main card at the Intuit Dome. Two champions walked into the arena looking to defend their titles, and both men emerged with their championships intact. Let's look back at it all right here on the RDX Sports Podcast. Welcome everyone, this is the RDX Sports Podcast. I'm Simon Head, and what a night of fights we had this past weekend at UFC 311. Two titles on the line at the Intuit Dome. What an arena, by the way. What an arena in Los Angeles, home of the LA Clippers. Two titles on the line on fight night down there in California. Both champions emerging with their titles intact. Let's run down that fight card. There's so much to talk about on that main card, but let's start with the main event. Islam Makhachev managing to hold on to his title with relative ease, it has to be said, retaining his belt with victory over Renato Moicano. Money Moicano being promoted up the card after Arman Tsarukyan was ruled out of the event on weigh-in day. An absolutely crazy turn of events where Tsarukyan reported that he'd experienced severe back pain, according to UFC President Dana White, and was going to be unable to compete on fight night on the Saturday. He was out. So who would come in? Beneil Dariush made 155 pounds. Renato Moicano made 155 pounds. Both those guys were due to face off on that main card in LA. One of them was going to get a chance at that 155 pound title, and the chance went to Money Moicano. Unfortunately, he just didn't have what was needed to give Islam Makhachev any kind of problems. He stood with him for a while, looked to sort of find his range and land some strikes, but Islam Makhachev looked like he was in second gear the whole way through. Eventually decided to go for a takedown, got the takedown, and eventually got that Darce choke with, I think, 4 minutes, 5 seconds on the clock in round number one. An absolutely dominant victory for a guy who was in there with a short notice opponent, but it was also short notice for him as well. So there's kind of detractors of his resume. You look at some of the people that he's beaten, particularly since he's become champion. He's beaten Alexander Volkanovski twice, a featherweight. He's now beaten Money Moicano, a former featherweight. And he's beaten Dustin Poirier, who back in the day was also a featherweight, but he's a bona fide lightweight now. But there are still detractors who say that Islam Makhachev's resume is not quite at the level of the very best the lightweight division has had to offer over the past few years. I would disagree with that. I think he is right up there with his mentor, Khabib. I think you take a look at Khabib Nurmagomedov's run to the title and his title reign. I think now Islam Makhachev is very close to eclipsing that. He's got that one loss on his record, which will always be that little asterisk that means that Khabib will always be viewed as being better than him. But I think Islam is like Khabib Mark II. I think everything Khabib does, Islam seems to be able to do just as well, but he strikes even better. I think he controls range better than Khabib does. And I think that overall, Islam is a better mixed martial artist than Khabib, which is a big thing to say, but I do believe that. And I think it'd be really interesting to get Khabib's view on that, to be honest, because what he's achieved in the sport is incredible. Retiring undefeated at 29-0 is a remarkable, remarkable achievement. Islam Makhachev is now the very top of the game in terms of elite level operators in the sport of mixed martial arts. And finally, Dana White has acknowledged that he is the pound for pound best fighter on the planet. Great performance from Islam Makhachev. All respect goes out to Renato Moicano. You've got to take your shot when it's presented to you like that. You know, it could have been a real rocky moment for him, but unfortunately he didn't get the job done. I don't think his stock has taken any kind of hit whatsoever, however. So I think he can now drop back into that mid-range where he was in the UFC, or where he still is rather, in the UFC's lightweight rankings. I think he went into the weekend ranked 10th. Beneil Dariush was ranked 9th, I believe. So he's still going to be there. He's still got those sorts of fights available to him. And maybe that Paddy Pimblett fight that we talked about on last week's show might become a little bit more interesting. Islam Makhachev defeats Renato Moicano via Darce choke or Bravo choke, depending on what you want to call it. 4 minutes, 5 seconds of the very first round. 4 title defenses for Islam Makhachev. That is a record in the UFC. Will he make it 5? Will he look to build a run of wins that will make him undeniably the best lightweight of all time? We shall see. There are no shortage of contenders in the lightweight division, but he has faced a lot of them already. So we shall see. Will the Tsarukyan fight come back to him at some point? Doesn't look like that's going to be the next one. Dana White's saying that Tsarukyan will have to go back to the drawing board. He's going to have to work his way back up. Very interesting comments from Dan Hooker via Submission Radio saying that who's going to want to fight him now when he pulls out on the day of the weigh-ins? You know, if you're signing to fight this guy, how can you know that he's actually going to show up for fight night? And it's a completely legitimate stance to take. Do you take a fight with a guy, A, who's super dangerous, he's number 1 ranked lightweight in the world, and number 2, someone who he got to the weigh-ins and pulls out of the fight citing an injury? We don't know what's gone on. There hasn't been that much information come out about exactly what did go on. What we do know is about 1 a.m, local time, he called the UFC and said, I'm experiencing severe back pain. I have an injury. I don't think I can compete. I'm going to have to withdraw from the fight. At the 11th hour, though, that's not a good look for him. It's probably tactically a better move than fighting when you're unable to compete at your best, when you know that it's a rematch already. And if you lose the rematch, then that's pretty much your chances of ever getting a shot at the belt gone. So I can understand that. Did he think he was going to miss weight and that missing weight would have then made it almost impossible for him to get another title shot for ages? It smacks a little bit of some sort of damage limitation going on. Clearly something was not right and he's pulled out for a legitimate reason. But were there other motivations involved as well? Is it a case of the lesser of two evils? You know, better to pull out with an injury than to miss weight. Better to pull out with an injury than to fight significantly compromised and lose the one shot you're going to get at the lightweight belt. What it does mean is he's going to have to build back up again. If he does so, he's certainly got the skills to earn himself a title shot in the future. He's probably going to need to beat 1 or 2 big names in the division, I think, before they give him another crack at that title. Let's talk about the co-main event, and what a fight it was. Merab Dvalishvili defeating Umar Nurmagomedov by unanimous decision after 5 of the most breathless rounds of MMA you will see anywhere in 2025, and probably anywhere in the last 10 years that we've just been watching. So unbelievable stuff from Merab, who, let's be honest, I think he was 2 rounds down heading into the 3rd round. It was really, he needed to really do something in those last 3 rounds or he was losing the belt. Umar Nurmagomedov fought 2 brilliant rounds at the start of that fight. He was better in the stand-up. He stuffed all of the takedown attempts pretty much from Merab. And he was really bossing the fight at that point. And you could see the confidence sort of surging through him at the end of the 1st round in particular, and then the 2nd round. But by the end of the 2nd round, the tide had started to turn a little bit. And by the time they went back to the stalls at the end of round 2, it felt like the momentum was with Merab Dvalishvili. It felt like he had started to wear on Umar Nurmagomedov. And who knows? I mean, maybe Umar thought he was going to get him out of there quickly and wasn't able to. But whatever it was, whether it's the adrenaline dump of being in a big title fight, the pressure of being under the lights in a huge UFC pay-per-view, facing a world champion, all eyes on you, the pressure of having your team behind you, you know, your teammate, the all-conquering pound-for-pound #1 in the world is fighting after you. Your teammate who fought in the first fight of the night, Serghei Ulanbekov, he got his win in the first fight of the night as well. It really is one of those where there was a lot of pressure, I think, on Umar Nurmagomedov, and I think some of the things that were said in the lead up to the fight might have just served to raise a little bit of pressure on him. So did that play a part? Possibly. But what certainly did play a part, and can be no argument, was Merab Dvalishvili's pace. The cardio on that man is just almost inhuman. For him to be able to fight like that, to be a professional mixed martial artist and to fight with a wrestle-heavy style, your cardio needs to be insane anyway. You look at any MMA fighter who is largely a wrestler, has largely a wrestling base, their cardio has to be something pretty special. Put it down in a lower weight class where everything is faster and you're having to move quickly, you're shooting more takedowns, everything's much more fast-paced. That cardio becomes even more important. And for Merab Dvalishvili to seemingly speed up as the fight went on, which is an insane thing to consider, he actually seemed to get faster as the night went on, was just unbelievable. Round 3, 4, and 5, Merab took those rounds, certainly on my scorecard, and wins the fight. Unanimous decision, 2 48-47 cards, and one judge actually gave him 49-46, which I think they gave him the first round, which I think was a little bit harsh on Umar. I thought Umar clearly took the first 2 rounds. And what we got to bear in mind is that was Umar's first taste of a real massive fight in the UFC, like a really seriously big fight. And he came up short, but he came up short against one of the best fighters on the planet. And a guy with a very particular set of skills, which are very, very difficult to countenance if you can't get the guy out of there with your striking. So I thought Umar fought really well. I thought he fought incredibly well to go all 5 rounds. Yeah, he was knackered by the end of the fight, but he was hanging in there with Merab, and Merab breaks people. And he didn't break Umar Nurmagomedov, but he certainly had him exhausted by the end of that fight. And for Merab, a great performance from him. Incredibly humble guy, incredibly proud of where he comes from, grateful for all the opportunities he's been given. And it's hard not to feel happy for him, the way he goes about his business, the way he fights, heart on the sleeve character. And to go out there and do what he did, tip of the cap to Merab Dvalishvili. That was a super impressive performance. As for Umar Nurmagomedov, there is no doubt he is elite level in that UFC bantamweight division, and I feel absolutely sure he will hold championship gold around his waist at some point in the next few years. But this past weekend, the night and the title belonged to Merab Dvalishvili. That was the 2 title fights, but let's talk about the fight that for me was the fight of the night. I was absolutely staggered, gobsmacked, stunned, amazed, whatever adjective you want to describe. I could not believe that Jiri Prochazka versus Jamahal Hill did not win the fight of the night bonus on Saturday night. That award went to Merab versus Umar. Super high level fight. Really, really good matchup. One of the best title fights we've seen in a while. Absolutely no problem with that whatsoever. But Jiri Prochazka versus Jamahal Hill is the sort of fight that you're going to be talking about in 12 months' time when we're looking at Fight of the Year candidates. It was just insanity from start to finish. The fact it even got to the 3rd round is sort of mind-blowing, given the sort of strikes that they were throwing and landing during that fight. I thought Jamahal Hill fought pretty well. I thought he did okay. I thought he didn't get too careless. I thought he worked behind the jab pretty well. And you could see he was looking for openings. He was looking for Jiri Prochazka to basically open himself up and get caught. And there were times where Jiri Prochazka absolutely opened himself up and did get caught. But not as much as we're used to seeing. Jiri Prochazka is unlike any MMA fighter out there. He fights in a style all of his own. But what he added to his game was enough to just edge him up a level against Jamahal Hill on Saturday night. Head movement. 2 words, head movement. He's still holding his hands low. He's throwing the strikes from weird angles, which works for him, but it doesn't do much for your defense. If you're not going to hold your hands up, you better have good head movement. And his head movement looked much, much better. Normally, in past fights, you go back and watch him, he walks in, his chin's wide open, it's sort of chin up in the air, and there's not a lot of lateral movement with his upper body. He's just looking to throw shots, and he's sort of laser focused on where he's throwing them. On Saturday, he was dipping, he was bobbing and weaving, and he was making himself a lot harder to hit. He was still getting caught because Jamahal Hill is a top-level UFC light heavyweight, former champion, as is Jiri. But he wasn't able to catch him with that absolute honey punch that was going to knock him out completely. So, but what a fight. What a fight. It went all the way to the third round. At some point, something happened in that third round, and Jiri just, you could almost see him. He sort of nodded his head, dipped his knees, and went, right, you're having it now. And he just went for it and absolutely went full on berserker mode on Jamahal Hill, overwhelmed him with strikes. And I think Mike Beltran, the referee, I think it was, dived in. Good stoppage, I thought, by the referee. 3 minutes and 1 second into that third round. Absolute chaos of a light heavyweight fight in the best possible way. I don't think Jamahal Hill's stock will be that damaged by that defeat. I think he looked super competitive. I think he proved that he is absolutely still right up there with the very best at 205 pounds. It's just that I think Jiri Prochazka is probably the second best guy in the UFC at 205 pounds. The problem for him is the number one guy at 205 pounds has already knocked him out twice, or stopped him with strikes twice, rather. And that's Alex Pereira, who was there in the crowd. Jiri Prochazka said, I want a third fight. Camera cuts to Poatan, looks down the lens and just goes, Chama. He's happy to have that fight. He's beaten him twice already. He's got nothing to worry about as far as he's concerned. This is a guy who he's beaten twice. But as fans, do we want that fight again? Hell yeah. Oh yeah, let's have that fight again. That is an International Fight Week fight if ever there was one. You put that as a co-main event in Las Vegas, first week of July or whenever International Fight Week is going to be this year. That is absolute surefire banger. Brazil versus the Czech Republic. Jiri Prochazka his star power seemed to just go up hugely over the course of this fight week. It was interesting how this happened to Pereira a few fights back, where all of a sudden he just seemed to gain this popularity. And people just really played into it, and they really seemed to really sort of fall in love with Alex Pereira. I feel like we had a little bit of that with Jiri Prochazka this week, and his stock has definitely risen. Aside from him getting the win, I just feel with the fan base, his stock has risen as well. And as a fan-friendly fight between two guys who the fans both love, two guys whose fighting styles just make for excitement whenever they step into the cage. Pereira versus Prochazka 3, even though it's 2-0 to Pereira, that's a fight that I would absolutely love to see in the summer, if we can make that happen. We shall see. There is a fight that Alex Pereira has to deal with first. He takes on Magomed Ankalaev at UFC 313 on March the 8th. He gets that done, he could probably get a decent enough turnaround fight in early July during the International Fight Week. That will work out perfectly, assuming he gets through the big Russian Magomed Ankalaev on March 8th. But what a fight we just had at UFC 311. Jiri Prochazka, Jamahal Hill. I salute the pair of you. That was unbelievable stuff. Jamahal will come back of that, I am sure. As for Jiri, he's on that quest again. Third time lucky against Alex Pereira? Let's see that in the summer, shall we? All right, earlier in the night, we had heavyweights in the cage. Two fringe contenders among the big boys. We had Jailton Almeida versus Serghei Spivac. Two guys who both like to get their job done on the mat. Spivac had the size advantage. Almeida probably the speed advantage. And as it turned out, when the fight went to the mat, it was Jailton Almeida who had the advantage in terms of working his way into position on the mat. But it wasn't a submission finish. It was a TKO finish, and it was a pretty brutal one at that. Managed to finally get Spivac flattened out, face down on the canvas, and just wild down with some absolutely huge ground and pound. Got the stoppage, 4:53 in round number 1. Big win for Jailton Almeida. I felt like he needed that. He's trying to build his way back. He got himself exposed a little bit a few fights back. It's been a little bit one-dimensional, and I think if he can add a bit more striking to his arsenal so that he's a bit more serviceable as a stand-up fighter, that will help him go a long way in this heavyweight division. His grappling is certainly good enough to finish just about anybody, but it's how you get the fight to the mat. Against Spivac, who was willing to take the fight to the ground himself anyway, I think that made that a little bit easier. But if he's in there with someone who predominantly is a striker, but they've got decent takedown defense, Almeida doesn't have a huge amount for them in the stand-up, or at least he hasn't had so far. He's getting better, but I think that area of his game is going to be the crucial defining factor on whether he eventually makes it to championship level in that UFC heavyweight division. Spivac's someone who's dangerous against just about anybody. Unfortunately, that one did not go well for him on Saturday night. Back to the drawing board for the Polar Bear. Looking forward to seeing how they book him later in the year. Almeida, he wants Cyril Gane, and that makes absolute sense as a matchup. Big Cyril needs an opponent. Jailton Almeida has been chasing him for a while. It makes sense for the division. Let's see that one booked. Even if it means Jailton has to head over to France to fight Cyril in Paris, that wouldn't be a terrible assignment. Get over there and possibly get yourself in line for a title shot later in the year. But big performance on Saturday night from Jailton Almeida. And to wrap up this recap, the first fight on the main card, middleweight division, Reinier versus Kevin Holland. This was really going to be a case of how long can Kevin Holland keep this fight off the mat? If he keeps it off the mat and keeps it standing, he could potentially light up Reinier like a Christmas tree. Unfortunately for him, Reinier pretty much was shooting from the walkout. He was shooting that early and he came straight out of his corner like a bullet from a gun, straight into a takedown attempt. And once the fight was on the mat, it was pretty much all she wrote. Worked his way into a position. Holland is decent on the ground. He's got excellent grappling skills himself. I think he's a black belt under Travis Luter, so he's certainly no mug when it comes to that. But Reinier is just like an octopus when he's down there. I was talking to my old colleague Abby Saban from MMA Junkie. We were kind of keeping track of the fights and messaging during the fights. And I said, if it stays upright, Kevin Holland wins this one quite easily. If it goes to the mat, Reinier is an octopus on the canvas. He's just all over the place with the arms and legs. He just wrap you up and turn you into a pretzel. And that's pretty much what he eventually did. He worked his way into position, got the rear naked choke. 3.5 minutes was all it needed. 3:31 the official time of the opening round for Reinier, who gets the win. That's 2 impressive wins in the UFC. He wants top 5 opposition next. Not sure if he'll get top 5 straight away, but certainly somewhere in the top 10, he should be getting somebody who's going to give him a little bit more of a well-rounded test, possibly someone who isn't going to get taken down as quickly, possibly. I don't know whether Holland was just caught by surprise, thought that maybe Derrida was going to try and ease his way in gradually. Nah, Derrida just goes straight for it. Absolutely, just bullet a gate, straight for the takedown. But what it does, it shows everybody else in the division that that's what he could potentially do when he faces you. How do you combat that? How do you keep the fight standing? Or you start drilling the old Jorge Masvidal flying knee, because that's exactly what Ben Askren was trying to do to him back then in that infamous fight between those two during International Fight Week a few years back. Masvidal had drilled that flying knee, hit him with it absolutely perfectly, and got that super quick knockout that I believe is still the fastest knockout in UFC history. So what will we see for Reinier next? He wants top 5. I say give him top 10 and let's see how it goes. But the Dutch Knight is someone who is not to be underestimated in that middleweight division. He's proved that he can make 185 pounds now, and he's done it twice. So any worries about the weight, which I'll be honest, I had some worries when he first came into the UFC. Let's not forget, light heavyweight division in one championship, which he was champion of, was 220 pounds. Middleweight division in one championship, he was a champion there, 205 pounds. And he's now fighting at 185 pounds. So big opportunity for him to move up that middleweight division. His striking isn't all that great, but if he's on the floor, he's one of the best in the world at 185 pounds. It's all about, can those guys at the very top of the division keep the fight standing? If they can, then we're really going to see what Reinier got. And if his striking is good enough to eventually work his way to a takedown, then we could see Reinier potentially breaking into that top 5 by the end of the year. But hard not to be impressed with the man. He's come into the UFC, a lot of hype over his career, having had those 2 titles in one championship. And you know what? He's living up to it so far. Looking forward to seeing how they book him in the coming months. As an international fighter, someone based in Europe, he can obviously come and fight on a European Fight Night card. I'd love to see the UFC get on the road, do some more European shows. I mentioned that in my hopes and dreams for 2025 episode a couple of weeks back. He's the sort of guy who could potentially headline or co-headline a card in Europe over the course of this year. So we'll see what they've got planned for him, but he's a great addition to the middleweight division. And he's a very, very dangerous man on the mat. Reinier, I think he could have a big year in 2025. All right, that's just about all we've got time for on this episode of the RDX Sports Podcast. Thanks everyone for checking out the show. Don't forget you can follow me on the socials at Simon Head across all social platforms. And don't forget to follow RDX Sports while you're at it. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, head to Spotify, subscribe to us there, head to Apple Podcasts and subscribe to us there. The audio versions of this very show can be found on those two platforms. If it's video you want, YouTube is the place to be. Make sure you're subscribed here and you'll get the very latest from RDX Sports, including this podcast. Hope you enjoyed the fights this past weekend. We've got the PFL coming up this coming weekend in Dubai. Usman Nurmagomedov versus Big News Paul Hughes, a huge fight for what used to be called the Bellator lightweight title. Who the hell knows what they're calling it now? Hopefully we'll find out before the weekend, but that's going to be a great fight to top that card in Dubai. Then the following week, the UFC heads to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia with Israel Adesanya versus Nasruddin Imavov in the main event. Adesanya's first non-title fight in 6 years. And the co-main event is an absolute banger. Shara Bullet Magomedov versus Michael Venom Page, who's moving up to 185 pounds for the first time in his pro MMA career for an absolute cracker of a matchup in the co-main event. We'll look ahead to that one and the main event and some of the other fights on the card on next week's show. But for now, enjoy the PFL this coming weekend, and I'll speak to you next week.